I am excited to introduce Dr. Stephen Ganji, who serves as the interim provost for Johns Hopkins University. In this role, Dr. Ganji is the Chief Academic Officer for the university and is responsible for promoting and coordinating its teaching and research missions. He oversees the university's 9 schools, as well as several interdisciplinary programs and academic centers. Dr. Ganji is also a professor of epidemiology at Johns Hopkins University School of Public Health and has served as the university's executive vice provost for academic affairs since 2015. I would like to turn it over to Dr. Ganji to introduce the panelists.
Great. Thank you very much, Ashana. Good morning, everyone. Thank you. Thanks, Ashana, for introducing today's discussion. Before we get started, we do want to make this somewhat interactive. So there will be an opportunity to submit questions to the panelists and myself during the discussion. And you can send it, you'll see in a moment, to an email address or a text number on the screen. And we'll try to get to as many questions as we can. I'm delighted to welcome you today to this morning's discussion on academic freedom, one of the core values of Johns Hopkins University. And I hope each of you will come to cherish your time here. As you waved goodbye to everyone over the last couple of days, I know some of you cracked a smile and said, "I'm free," right? You know, I certainly know my own children, when I dropped them off to college, said the same thing. As you soon discover, it's also quite profound. In many ways, you'll be freer here at Hopkins than almost anywhere else that you've been or anywhere that you're likely to go. That's because there are many different freedoms, and nearly all of them converge on a university campus. Freedom from parental constraints, freedom to travel, freedom to develop your own identity, freedom to worship or not, freedom of expression, and freedom to pursue ideas wherever they may lead you without undue influence. At Johns Hopkins, we value all freedoms, but academic freedom perhaps above all else. That's because without it, we could not succeed in our mission to foster independent and original research and to bring the benefits of discovery to the world. Without it, our faculty could not test new and unorthodox ideas or share knowledge with you and the world that some may find unwelcome. Academic freedom protects our community from being persecuted for their ideas and protects our students from having an education limited by authorities who disagree. Let me give you my own example. My own academic area is in epidemiology of infectious diseases, where I've been studying HIV for 30 years. One of the great things about COVID, one of the few good things about COVID, is everyone knows what epidemiology is now, right? Because everyone's an epidemiologist, including my parents and my sister, who understand the patterns and predictors of disease. Studying HIV brings up a lot of ideas that are uncomfortable. HIV is a virus that can be transmitted through sexual contact or through the use of shared needles, which means studying sexual behavior and drugs that some find squeamish and others find morally abhorrent. It's a disease that can touch anyone, but is concentrated in populations that are often marginalized or subject to discrimination. Men who have sex with men, people who exchange sex for money, transgender individuals, and individuals who are homeless. Southern states today account for 51% of newly identified HIV cases, but they just constitute 38% of the US population. And both political and cultural factors play a key role in driving the Southern HIV epidemic, including stigma, which has been associated with lower or delayed access to care due to perceived discrimination from healthcare providers. Faculty members like me are free to study these complicated and often divisive issues, knowing that the university backs them. The freedom of Johns Hopkins medical and public health university experts to publish without interference, to speak and contribute our expertise to advisory committees, and testify and consult with federal and state authorities is one of the reasons Hopkins is a national leader among universities. Now it's important to understand what academic freedom is and what it isn't. Understanding the distinctions helps one see the responsibilities that go in hand with the freedom. First, academic freedom is the freedom to follow your nose and study whatever idea pops into your head. It's not the freedom to say whatever idea pops into your head. Academic freedom is not the same as freedom of speech. This leads to the first responsibility inherent in academic freedom, the responsibility to hold ideas to a high standard. We are America's first research university, and research requires rigor. The ideas we share must be backed up by sound evidence and argumentation. They are not, when they are not, their expression is not an exercise in academic freedom, but rather academic laziness or even ignorance. Second, academic freedom is the freedom to explore any idea you like. It is not the freedom to shut down any idea that you don't. Indeed, the best way to advance the progress of ideas is to ensure that people whose ideas we disagree with are given a voice, provided they meet the same high standards we apply to ourselves and allow us, in turn, to subject their ideas to scrutiny. Many of you may have watched an eclipse that scientists can predict down to the minute. Century earlier, scientists seeking to explain the movements of the sun and moon were convicted of heresy. Today's heresy may become tomorrow's dogma, and today's accepted wisdom may be disproved before long. From time to time, this means listening to ideas that we may find deeply disquieting. It's important in these moments to remember to allow all ideas to get aired, and does not mean acquiescence to the content of those ideas. If anything, listening to these ideas empowers you to better interrogate their content, find flaws, and give substance to your dissent. This leads to a third critical distinction. Academic freedom gives us reign over how we think. It does not give us reign over how we act on our thoughts. Intimidation and harassment are unacceptable. The protest staged by white supremacists in Charlottesville in 2017 was not academic freedom, right? Was unbridled racism and hatred designed to intimidate and inspire fear, right? We have no place for this at Johns Hopkins. We will dissent in strongest possible terms from ideas that seek to turn our diversity into a source of strife. Let me close my remarks with my hope during your time here and your many conversations with your classmates and professors that will inform your thinking, broaden your horizons, and inspire your new intellectual frontiers. In this regard, I hope you will sign up for courses that don't just reinforce your views, but also challenge them. Seek to cultivate in yourself the ability to see things from many points of view. If you leave here without ever having your ideas tested, you will miss out on one of the key gifts of a university education. This is why you chose Johns Hopkins. Now, to better help us get this conversation started, we have three distinguished panelists. First, Hilary Bach, Associate Professor of Philosophy and the Luce Professor in Bioethics and Moral and Political Theory in the Krieger School of Arts and Sciences and the Berman Institute for Bioethics. Minka Makalani, Associate Professor and Director of the Center of Africana Studies in the Krieger School, and Hari Hahn, Professor of Political Science and the inaugural Director of the Agora Institute. Each brings a unique perspective to the topic of academic freedom and importance, given the unique mix of scholarship and professional experience. So I want to start there, Hilary, with what does academic freedom mean to you?
Yeah, so thank you so much. I should just say at the outset that at the moment their academic freedom is under siege from a number of different quarters, and I'm not going to focus right now on, various politicians who are trying to infringe on academic freedom in different ways, not because I don't think that's important, but just because I suspect that none of you actually holds elective office, right? I mean, do any of you hold, not an elective office like in a club, but in your town or state? Is anyone here the Lieutenant Governor of Texas? No, okay. So anyways, I thought I would try to say things that were useful to you as opposed to just talking about other people I don't agree with. Anyways, be that as it may. When I think about what academic freedom means to me, it's just, to me, immediately obvious. So I teach bioethics, some of you may in fact be signed up for my course in bioethics. And in bioethics, as you might imagine, we talk about a whole bunch of issues that are very controversial. So we talk about abortion, We talk about physician-assisted suicide. We talk about justice in healthcare. I mean, we just talk about a whole bunch of things that are deeply, deeply controversial. And I may or may not succeed in this. I never try to claim success in anything because bitter experience has shown that I'm often wrong when I do that. But I at least try when I do this, first of all, to frame arguments so that whatever your view on, let's suppose, abortion, you can look at the argument and say, does this argument for or against abortion work? And if not, why not? Just so that everybody can discuss that, however strongly they feel about the matter. But secondly, at least when I teach, and this gets to the point about freedom not being license, I always try to teach bearing in mind that some of my students might find even, thinking about abortion deeply religiously problematic, while others of my students might, for example, be wondering right now whether they should get an abortion or not, or they may have had one yesterday. Right? This, it seems to me, is one, or their significant other might have, or they might have just spent the past week counseling their best friend through the process of getting an abortion. So I think to myself, I don't know most of this. So bioethics is a huge course. In smaller courses, I do know all my students, but bioethics usually has around 200 people in it. And tragically, I don't get to know everybody. So I look out and I think there are these people that I don't know. But what I say has to be, I want it to be something that doesn't cause needless pain to any of my students, even if they just got an abortion yesterday, or even if abortion is something that they personally find religiously abhorrent, and the very idea just makes, their hair curl, or whatever their views are, and whatever the source of, pain might be, or whatever role this plays in their life, right? I don't want to make it worse, obviously. So I try to frame it in such a way that it doesn't make things worse. And so I just say that because it seems to me that is, at least to me, an example of what it is we're supposed to do. We're supposed to encourage argument, not sort of send people home in floods of tears. Right? That's not something I've ever really aspired to do. But anyways, the point is, I rely on academic freedom in order to teach those courses. I couldn't teach those courses. I'd probably quit. If the administration said, no, you must take a pro-abortion or an anti-abortion line on this. It's no, I'm sorry, I'm not willing to live that way. So I rely on academic freedom every single day. And it's really, really important to me. And I think that it should probably be really important to all of you because, so there have been a bunch of studies or surveys that have asked students, do you feel pressure to conform to various political opinions? And a number of them have come back with the result that they don't feel very much pressure to conform from their professors, and I'm sure there are exceptions, and there shouldn't be. But they feel much more pressure to conform from their fellow students. And I think, so I just want to say, try also, when you're talking to your fellow students, not to just shut them down, even if they say something that you find is abhorrent, that you think is abhorrent. I mean, again, there are limits, right? Hello, I have just joined the American Nazi Party would be one of those things, right? Then you just no, there is no possible explanation for that. That's just abhorrent. But a lot of times, again, one era's sort of mandatory thing to think is another era's, dear God, they thought that. And one of the very few advantages of reaching an advanced age is that you've seen this in action. There are things people used to think that used to be you gotta think this. And now that's we had to think, what? You must be out of your mind. It's really worth bearing that in mind. And it's also really worth bearing in mind what the cost is of not engaging in, not letting people explore ideas with the assumption that they might be wrong. So at least for me, I'm wrong all the time, right? So I rely on the fact that I can be wrong, and at least people who know me, I hope, will think, it's not that she's a jerk. She's just being an idiot on this particular occasion. And, because she's not fundamentally a jerk, I hope, but I could be wrong. Because she's not fundamentally a jerk, the proper response is not to say, oh, you are a jerk, I'm going to go protest you. The proper response is to say, wait, Professor Bach, because all my friends call me Professor Bach. Wait, Professor Bach, you have said something completely stupid. And then I will listen to them and learn something. Or maybe it will turn out that I'm right and they'll learn something. But this learning stuff doesn't happen if you don't give people the freedom just to say things, even if they sound off the top of your head, like, dear God, that's awful. And I just think it's so important, because I imagine a college experience in which every time you say anything wrong, as we all do, right, everybody jumps down your throat. And that's, to me, like the most horrible thing I can imagine, in part because I do say bad, things come out wrong. They just do. And that happens to me all the time. And I think in a world like that, I just wouldn't survive. Whereas in a world in which people are, just willing to say, I don't think you're right about that. Actually, I think that might even have been the sort of thing that's much stupider than the things that you ordinarily say. Why did you say it? Then, first of all, I can learn what my mistake is. And secondly, I won't get into a horrible defensive crouch and just shut down. The person might persuade me and I might change my mind and never say any such stupid thing again. That's what we should all aim for, to help make each other better people, because at least in my experience, none of us comes into college. One of you may be the exception to this rule, but most people don't come to college already being right about everything. I mean, if you did, why would you be here? It's to get an education, which presupposes at least one area of ignorance. So anyways, the point that I'm trying to make is be kind to each other, recognize that the best way to try to ensure that everybody understands stuff is to give each other room to say things, not to jump down one another's throat, and which I'm sure none of you would do anyways, because at least in my experience, Hopkins students are actually insanely nice. But just for the record, the world would be a better place if everyone were kinder, and it would be a more informed place if everybody listened to things that other people had to say, took them seriously, and regarded it as a failure of their own imagination. If, leaving aside obviously crazy cases, they can't understand how anybody could possibly say such a thing. Anyways, that's pretty much what I have to say. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Hillary. Minka, can I turn things over to you? And I see questions are starting to come in, so please keep sending them.
Okay. Well, welcome. I know this is a moment of great excitement for a number of you all for a number of reasons. Even though I am significantly older, I actually do remember my first week of college at a small black college in Ohio. Went to go play football, realized very quickly I didn't have an NFL future, and got serious about school. But one of the things I remember about that time was it was a moment and it was an environment where your ideas, what you knew, and your ability to defend those ideas was paramount in terms of how we interacted with one another. And then I transferred to the University of Missouri, Columbia. I'm from Kansas City, Missouri originally. And I found that same environment there. And that environment revolved around the field loosely at the time, but now a bit more defined, of Black studies, or Africana studies, as it's called here at Hopkins. And I raise this because we are at this moment of extreme attacks on academic freedom. And in many ways, these have focused, or they've been heightened by a conservative response to a general sense of Black studies. And this has been shorthanded as critical race theory. And the idea is that in this conglomerate of ideas that have been poorly encased up under this rubric of critical race theory, that people are being indoctrinated, that young minds, both in high school and in college, are being indoctrinated by critical race theory. And so Texas, where I used to teach, Florida, they have now instituted laws to constrict what one teaches, both at the high school and at the college level. And this is really unfortunate because I think it really does miss what is kind of profound about Black studies and a number of Black scholars who, in some states, you can't even teach about. So since we're in Maryland, this is a private institution, we can't teach about them, right? But I want to read this quote from a philosopher, and if anyone knows who this quote is by, raise your hand, because I want you to be a Black Studies major because you are way ahead of the game. It's a very obscure quote, but I think it kind of captures a sentiment about academic freedom that most would agree with. Education should not mold the mind according to a prefabricated architectural plan. It should rather liberate the mind and create human beings who possess a genuine concern for their fellow human beings. Now, if you happen to know who that's from, raise your hand. And so if you knew philosophers, you might think this is John Rawls, or you might think this is Richard Rorty. This is actually a 26-year-old Angela Y. Davis, who was a member of the Communist Party. She had been in the Black Panther Party. This is 1969. She had just been fired from a lectureship at the University of California, Los Angeles by then Governor Ronald Reagan, and fired because she was a communist. And this was her first lecture. So she's announcing to a class probably about this size what her idea of education involves. Now, Reagan probably had no idea about what specifically she taught, but the concern was that she represented a set of ideas and orientations that were seen as a danger to the state, a danger to American society. And those first lectures that she gave were, that you can find them now in a pamphlet online. If you look up Angela Davis, Lectures on Liberation, you'll see her first two lectures to this class. But what she did in that class is she said the idea of freedom that we have, and again, this is 1969, the civil rights movement has been successful in terms of ensuring the citizenship rights, the full citizenship rights of African Americans and Black people in the United States. They weren't necessarily all enforced equally or uniformly, but nonetheless, in law, it's there. The Black Power movement is raising a bit more set of fundamental questions about the nature of the US state. And she says, if we want to understand what freedom means, we need to look to the ideas, the words, and experiences of the formerly enslaved, because it's in those ideas that we see people understanding what freedom means to the larger society, and then how that doesn't translate into all human beings. And she begins with the ideas of Frederick Douglass, someone who was enslaved in Baltimore, actually, escaped to the north, first to New York, lives for a time in England. And this idea that freedom, as we understand it in the US, as it's been encased and enshrined in the Constitution of the United States and the documents and ideas of the founding quote unquote fathers, that these are inherent in those ideas and these documents are the basis for freedom. And then in this perverse way, according to one set of curriculum proposals, that those ideas provided the basis upon which those who were enslaved in the United States, and then women and other minorities, have been able to advocate and gain their rights and citizenship. If you ever take my class, you'll know this is, I have a propensity for profanity. I think it has a use. This is utter BS. I won't say what I really want to say. But when you look at Frederick Douglass's ideas, you see it's a much different understanding of freedom and the limits of freedom, at least at how it's understood by the United States. Angela Davis was ultimately fired again. She was put on trial for murder. She was acquitted of that. And her ideas, her activism have led into a number of arenas and have been immensely influential. Now, why do I raise this in talking about the current moment? So you are all old enough to remember the summer of 2020 and the murder of George Floyd, and then the response in Minnesota and then around the world, the Black Lives Matter protests. One of the key phrases that became very popular in that period, one of the key demands that activists made were to, one, defund the police, and then alternatively, abolish the police and abolish prisons. This comes out of an abolitionist movement, a prison abolitionist movement that really takes off in California and is spread across the United States. And Angela Davis is a key figure, a key intellectual and political figure in that movement. And one of the things that they argue in arguing for the abolition of police and prisons is that if we look at what police do and we look at why people are going to prison, particularly if you focus on men of color and women of color, you see two different sets of experiences, but consistently across the board, you see a lack of social services. You see a lack of resources in both the home and the institutions that are kind of funneling them to prison, i.e. public education, social services, the lack of social services, and then the lack of adequate care, adequate mental health care, et cetera. So if we don't focus that money, that budget, that funding on the police, but we direct it to these other realm of social services, then we can see different kinds of outcomes. It's at that moment that you see this strident attack on critical race theory, which is a very tame, liberal legal theory that says the way that laws and institutions are structured in the United States and the way they operate can perpetuate racial inequality, even if everybody in power believes in racial equality. That we actually have to transform the system. We can't just transform the individual. So we have to have a complex approach, but it doesn't actually propose the overthrowing of the United States, the overthrowing of governments, or any such thing. But that became shorthand, and then everything gets thrown into the proverbial melting pot of right-wing conspiracy theories. And so this is why you have the outlawing of AP African American, or not outlawing, but the rejection of AP African American courses in Florida, in Arkansas now. And you have actually schools in Arkansas who are refusing to not offer those courses. They're insisting on offering those courses. As well, I think, in Texas and other places, largely in the Northeast. So when I say all this, and I begin with Angela Davis and Black Studies, in part because this is my intellectual training, my background, this is the work I do. But when we look at the most recent attack by the Supreme Court, and I think it is appropriate to say it's an attack because it actually has very flimsy bases in legal precedent. This is the outlawing of affirmative action. The outlawing, actually, not of affirmative action, but the outlawing of the consideration of race as a factor in college admissions. And there was a study done by someone named Bleemer, I can't remember the first name, but it looked at the impact of what was Prop 209. This is a 1998 ballot initiative that led to the banning of race-based affirmative action in the University of California system. And the scholar who did the study, Bleemer, found that after Prop 209, there was a net outflow of low-income students admitted into the University of California system. That you had a 1% drop in students of color, Black and Latinx students in particular, attaining degrees in STEM, as well as a 1.3% drop in Black and Latinx students going into graduate school, getting graduate degrees. A 4% drop in the attainment of a BA, even at lower tiered schools in the California system. And then most significantly, a 5% drop in income attainment between the ages of 24 and 34. This is that period where you really find some basis for your future possibilities, life income, et cetera, mobility. So all of these things aren't disconnected. When we think about what are some of the most fundamental claims and demands that Black Studies has made historically, one of those things, one of those most fundamental demands has been to question how we interrogate, how we study, how we know what we know, the kinds of questions we ask, and the way that we investigate. So I'm trained formally as a historian, and the idea is that you go to an archive, you look at documents, and then your ideas emerge from those documents. You begin to answer questions, and then you write a narrative that explains someone's ideas. I'm an intellectual historian, so how someone came to their ideas, et cetera. But what Black Studies says is, what is the basis upon which you are asking a particular question? And is that question rooted in a set of assumptions that actually have led to and are foundational to an educational system, a social structure in the larger society that has explicitly disadvantaged certain groups? And so when I think about academic freedom and the need to have a free range of ideas, and I think back to my first year at Central State University in Ohio, and then when I transferred to the University of Missouri, one of the things that was always paramount, you had to know what you were talking about. And if you didn't know what you were talking about, it didn't mean you couldn't ask questions. But when your questions were challenged, when your ideas were challenged, it was then incumbent upon you to go and study, to investigate, to try and have a better understanding of the question you were asking, why you were asking the question, what guided that question, and what are the implications of the question in and of itself for other groups of people. Now, one way you might think about this in a very simplistic way that I think would reject is it okay, is it a legitimate question interrogating or trying to understand the biological inferiority of African descended peoples in academics or in any other field? I think we would most of us, hopefully all of us, would reject that as a good faith question. It's rooted in racism, it has no legitimacy. We actually have studies upon studies that disprove this, so it's out of bounds. But a question that is pretty current today is, and for some of you this may be controversial, but can a man deliver a baby? Can a man become pregnant and deliver a baby? Now some might say no. Some might say yes. Some might you might never have had that question. But what is the basis of the question? What are we interrogating? Who is impacted by that? And then we're talking about the experiences of trans men. We're talking about men who are able to become pregnant and deliver a baby and parent that baby. In some instances, you might even find trans men breastfeeding. So the question itself assumes that one cannot, as a man, deliver a baby. So is it a good faith question? It may be if you're coming from a certain set of experiences. And I grew up in a Southern Black household, and so is politically progressive but socially conservative. I had to have my sexism and my homophobia challenged almost on a routine basis when I got to college by my peers and by professors. And it was a process for me to let go of some of those ideas, but also understand why I had them and what was the trouble, what was the problem with those ideas. So I'll leave with this basic sense of what I have of academic freedom. And this is, what is intellectual inquiry? And what are the methodological tools that one needs to engage in good faith, sound intellectual inquiry, scholarly study? That is something that involves thinking critically, learning what is a good question, and if you are told that there's something wrong with the question, how do you then engage that challenge? But the impetus, the onus is always on you when you're challenged to understand, is it a good faith challenge or is it just trying to shut you down? And if it's asking you a question and is asking you to really interrogate your assumptions, how do you then go about interrogating your deeply held beliefs? And then what do you do after that? Now, it doesn't mean that everybody comes out of, after 4 years of being at Hopkins, or even if you're an Africana major, you're gonna come out with the same ideas as everyone else. That actually isn't the objective of anyone that I know of in academia. But it does require, and it does hope that who you are today is much different in how you think, the kinds of ideas you have, the values you have, when you leave here in 4, 5, or 6 years. And if you leave here with the same ideas, the same values, the same beliefs as you came in with today, then you have been failed by the university, by the educational system. Hopefully, you weren't just obstinate and say, I refuse to change anything, I refuse to question my beliefs. Hopefully, you're open to those kind of challenges. But the purpose of education is to help you grow intellectually, socially, your values, to interrogate those, and to change, to grow. And hopefully, that is something that you can turn to a range of fields, both in STEM and the humanities, and gain from the wealth of faculty and your colleagues, your fellow students that you have here.
Great, thank you, Minka. All right, Hari, what does it mean to you?
Good morning. It's really good to see all of you. I had a prior meeting all the way across campus, and so I asked to go last on the panel because I had to book it across campus, really sweating when I got here. And so the downside of doing that is I think I'm going to say things that are very resonant with what's already been said. But I'm really excited to have the opportunity to talk with you all. As the provost had reminded us, I'm Hari Han, a professor in the political science department. I also direct an institute called the SNF Agora Institute. And what I want to do in talking about academic freedom is give you a little bit of sense of what we do as an institute, because it's very core to the kind of work that we do. But start like Minka did with telling you a little bit about how I came into this work. The main message that I want to leave you with, I think, picks up on the idea that the provost started us with, which is the idea that freedom is not just license to do whatever you want to do, but that freedom is interdependent. And so the freedom that you have is interdependently and intimately tied up with the freedom that all of your classmates have. And so it's something that all of you have to nurture together as classmates, as a cohort, throughout the course of your 4 years. But what do I mean by that? So I grew up as a daughter of Korean immigrants in Houston, Texas. I don't know if anyone is from Houston here, but I grew up in Alief, which is a part of Houston that's sort of in the southwest corner of the city. It's 90% non-white, 10% white. My parents had immigrated from Korea. I was born in the United States. And the community is very diverse. It's a mix of mostly Hispanic and Asian immigrants. About a quarter of the population, I think, is black, and about 10% of the population is white. The schools that we were zoned to when I was living in Alief at the time had a lot of violence in the schools, and so my parents didn't want to send me there. So they sent my brother and I to a Catholic school that was in a different part of town, and that happened to be full of a lot of people who were a lot more affluent than my family was mostly white community, everyone was Catholic. And so what that meant was that I ended up going to school in a place where I was separated from a lot of my classmates by our faith tradition, by linguistics, by culture, but all these different sort of things. But as I'm sure like many of you have done in your high schools or in other communities that you've been a part of, you have to just figure out how to make it, right? Like this is where I was going to school. You have to figure out how to make it. And I was in a place where I disagreed with a lot of my classmates on everything from matters having to do with the Pope to having to do with politics to everything else. And at the time when I was a kid, I think no one told me that what I was experiencing was freedom, but it was that in a sense, right? It was the freedom to be who I wanted to be, to think what I wanted to think, to express the views that I wanted to express. But I think what I learned over time from that experience is that my freedom to be able to do that, it was not just something that I have, right? It was not a right that I just hold on my own, but it was intimately tied up in my classmates' ability, my classmates' freedoms to do the same. And so thinking about that as freedom as being kind of, inextricably kind of intertwined with other people's, it means that the choices that I have to be able to exercise the kind of inquiry that both Professor Brock and Professor Minkalani were describing to us is really dependent on also allowing other people to engage in that same kind of inquiry and to make the choices that they want. And so I gather that, I'm guessing, just statistically speaking, that a lot of you are probably thinking you might be STEM majors, engineers, computer scientists, physicists, all these different kind of things. But I think that even if you think that you're not going to be someone who's going to be a philosophy or political science or Black studies major, that these questions about being able to pursue the questions you want to pursue, to sort of follow your nose in the directions that you want to go, are really tied up with the experience that all your classmates are having, and that's true of even in the sciences. And I wanted to pick up on something that Professor Bach said, which is that, at Agora, one of the things that we've done at Hopkins is run some surveys of the undergraduate population where we've sort of asked people, like, do you feel pressure to conform? Do you feel like your faculty pressure you to sort of take on certain views? And by and large, what we find is the answer is no. That like, I always think those surveys are kind of funny in a way because they vastly overestimate the influence that I feel like I have as a professor. Like, it's very rare that I feel like I can tell some student like what to think and they just think it. But that where the pressure comes from really is from the peers, that people feel scared sometimes to speak out because they feel pressure from their classmates to conform to a certain kind of a set of views. And I think that part of what we're trying to say is that, we want to release you from that, that the best kind of inquiry, the inquiry that, my colleagues have been describing comes from being able to question the sort of assumptions that all of you might bring to the table. So let me tell you about the Agora Institute. So I wear a couple different hats at the university. I'm a professor in the political science department, but I also direct an institute called the SNF Agora Institute. I'm gonna see all of you again on Saturday because we host Democracy Day, which is part of your orientation experience, and so I'll look forward to seeing you all then. And so you'll learn more about the Agora Institute then. But just to give you a little bit of preview, we are an we're a multidisciplinary academic and public forum that is dedicated to strengthening the mission of global democracy, like all over the world. But we think about the cornerstone of democracy as being about powerful civic engagement, but also informed civic dialogue, and the ability of people to engage in the kind of inquiry and the cross-cutting sort of conversations that we're describing in any kind of pluralistic community. And so the Institute takes its spirit from the ancient Athenian agora. So those of you who know your ancient Greek history, you remember the agora is the place where it's a marketplace where people used to come together, they'd go shopping, that Socrates would be speaking on the steps, or I don't know, you could probably describe it better than I can, but it's sort of this idea where at least there's been an intellectual legacy that's been left that sort of thinks about it as a space of free and open inquiry. And I think that's part of what we're trying to think about at the Institute. We do a lot of work with different communities around the world. So we're doing a lot of work in Ukraine, for example. We have a lot of work in the United States trying to think about how we shore up American democracy. But we also do a lot of work on campus where we're trying to create and inculcate and nurture the kind of spirit of this kind of civic engagement and open dialogue that we feel like is really important. And so what does academic freedom mean in that context, in the work of what we're doing at Agora? I think, as my colleague said, it refers to the freedom to sort of investigate core questions, right? Even if they're questions that are hard to ask, right? It is the freedom to conduct inquiry and then go where the evidence leads us, right, to sort of question the assumptions that we may have brought into the work and to sort of face the consequences of what that means, and there are consequences, as both of my colleagues have mentioned. We're in a moment right now in American history where academic freedom is absolutely being threatened. I have colleagues who are on our faculty at the SNF Agora Institute whose books have been banned in certain communities. We've had to deal with that kind of book banning. We've had instances where we have speakers who deeply disagree with other people in the community. We've had to handle that. We see our work being taken up in ways that we may not have necessarily wanted that work to be taken up. But we believe strongly in the commitment to really trying to fight for and nurture the kind of spaces that don't close off those kinds of conversations and that kind of inquiry, but in fact sort of make them more possible. And so one of the things that I want to plug is that we are we're starting actually this year a new minor in civic life that for students who may be curious and want to sort of develop some of the skills to be able to interact with each other in these ways, not doing the kind of work that Professor Makalani was describing that he experienced, as an undergraduate. It's not easy, right? Like when the core assumptions that you have are challenged in that way, and you have to really work to kind of rethink that, it requires a set of capacities and some support that sometimes is hard to seek. And so part of what we're trying to do in the minor is create space for people of all kinds to do that. The reason why we set it up as a minor is because we didn't want it to just be for people who might want to major in it, but also for all of you who think of yourselves as STEM majors. I'll just offer that when I first took this job as the director of the Agora Institute, we're about 4 years old now, the first person who came and spoke to me from the faculty was a physicist. And I was sort of surprised at first that it was a physicist who reached out to me, but he was talking about this controversy within the physics community where there's a big new, I think it's a telescope, but like an instrument in Hawaii that, that the physicists have been trying to construct for a long time, and it's run into some objections from the indigenous communities in Hawaii. And they were really struggling to figure out, like, how do we simultaneously advance the cause of science, but then also kind of respect and work with the community and the interests that they have. And so this is just an illustration of as a way of saying that, you know, in domains that you might not even anticipate, these questions come up. And so, you know, that's part of what we try to do at the Agora Institute is create space for people of all kinds, from students to faculty to everyone else, to be able to interrogate, to explore, and to realize the capacities that they need to really exercise freedom in the interdependent ways that, that we're talking about. So anyways, really excited to be here with you all today. I'm looking forward to seeing you guys again on Saturday, and look forward to questions.
Okay, thank you. Hari. So I've been looking at the questions as they've been coming in. So on Monday, all these students are going to be sitting in classrooms. I hope, right? You know, maybe, or maybe Tuesday. So it's a good question about what does academic freedom in the classroom look like, right? How can we ensure academic freedom and remaining respectful is part of the culture and ensuring that there are opposing viewpoints in the room. You want to talk about your own experiences in the classroom? Hillary, you want to start?
Yeah, I mean, I think fundamentally, well, so there are several parts of the question. One is a part sort of addressed to professors, like how do we make sure that people aren't being disrespectful? In this context, I always remember the time I learned, because I'd been a counselor before I was a professor. And as a counselor, you always want people to talk, and you're afraid of shutting them down. So I was hesitant to shut people down at first, but there's a student who sort of drove me to it finally. And when I said, look, you've just asked too many questions, you just don't get to ask any anymore. It's like the 10th question in one class. And the entire class burst into applause. And I sort of realized that perhaps I had erred on the side of like being accommodated. But there's that question. But as a student, I think, again, I'm thinking to myself, you don't yet need to know what it's like to be, or what's involved in trying to be a good professor. You need to know what's involved in trying to be good students. And to be a good student, I think it's just always worth realizing, just remembering, first of all, that, as I said, you don't know what issues are playing out in the lives of the people around you. You genuinely don't. You may, like, it may be that, like, your best friend is in one class with you, so maybe you know about, like, that person's life. But there are going to be students in your class who are quite unfamiliar to you. So if you're talking about, say, abortion, which I teach, again, bear in mind that someone in your class might just have had one. Bear in mind that someone in your class might find the idea of abortion just like morally abhorrent. There are like all sorts of positions on this spectrum about which people can feel very, very deeply. And that in no way means you should pull your punches. Right? It does mean that you should try to frame your argument, which can be like really incisive and clear, and should be really incisive and clear, but you can try to frame it in such a way that it doesn't also have personal insults in the middle of it, kind of all wrapped up together. So you can make the objection to what somebody else is saying without adding the part about how they're also an idiot. Right? So I think if you try to understand that there are people who have really different views from you, you don't know who they are necessarily, you don't know what's going on with the people around you, it could be anything. And you try to say, okay, how would I want somebody to conduct themselves given that they don't know what's going on with me? If we were talking about some issue that hit me really close to home, and then you just try to act that way. And again, also try to bear in mind that you don't always know which of the things that you think are obvious might actually be false. Again, I assume that I have false beliefs. I have tried to eradicate them, but I'm pretty sure I haven't succeeded. I'm pretty sure that however amazing most of you are, and in my experience, Hopkins students are genuinely amazing, right? But however amazing you all are, you're probably not actually omniscient yet, right? So bearing that in mind, just try to conduct yourself in a way such that your mind is open and your heart is open. And if there are people who are wrong, you recognize that the best way to learn something from the situation is to try to understand where they're coming from, not as an act of kindness, but as an act of genuine curiosity. And the best way to learn yourself is just to think, yeah, I mean, listen to what they have to say. Ask yourself how you would respond to it in a way that combined intellectual rigor and also generosity of heart.
Great. Other?
Let's add one.
Yeah, please.
And so I think that the habits of humility and empathy that Professor Bach is talking about are absolutely right. I think it's also true that, we as faculty play a role in helping to create a set of norms and a kind of creating a community within the classroom, right? But then you as students also play a role in playing into that. The thing that I would add, I think also is that I think part of how academic freedom plays out in the classroom is also overcoming your own fear to ask questions that that feel like they might be hard to ask, And so it's not just, it is absolutely a huge part of how you respond to comments that other people make. So that's a huge part of it. But it's also about your willingness, right, to speak up when something doesn't feel right, like when you're not sure what that is. Now, that doesn't mean to be uninformed, right? Like, we want you to be prepared for class. We want you to do the readings. Like, we want you to come in, but to challenge the assumptions, that as Professor Macaloni was describing to us, that might underlie some of those readings, and to do it in a way that models the kind of principles that Professor Bach was describing to us. And so sometimes I think we really need students to be willing to act with courage, in those moments, so that we can create the kind of norms in the community that we want to really enable the kind of unfettered learning that we hope you all will experience while you're here.
So that actually ties into another question, which is approaching a professor, right? How do we approach a professor who we believe may be impinging upon academic freedom, right? Such as oppressing certain views or not being open-minded. Has this ever occurred to you? Student come up to any of you and said, you're not putting forward the principles of academic freedom. Minka?
I haven't had an experience that was framed in exactly that way, but I have had students who have come to me and they disagree deeply with what I was saying in a lecture. And I think it's an illusion that professors go into a classroom and they're just entirely objective and they're just giving you all the facts and you're supposed to make sense of it. I don't think that happens. I think that every professor goes into the classroom with a clear sense of what they're trying to say, even if they're trying to give as balanced a view, at least in history, as balanced a view of the competing ideas, competing interpretations of historical events. You still have one that you're promoting in a way. But I had this student who came to me and really questioned, and I don't remember exactly what it was. This was early on in teaching. But they questioned why I was saying what I was saying and why I dismissed their idea. And it was a moment where I found myself questioning, oh, wait a minute, was I actually shutting them down? Was I being dismissive? And, what are the consequences of that? And so it did force me, and again, this was very early on in my teaching career, so it did force me to rethink how I was handling students who had different opinions. Now, this person, the one thing I do remember is that they were one of the brightest students in the class. They read everything. They always had questions, and so it was actually a welcome dynamic in the classroom. And we always want students who are reading, who are questioning us, who are making proposals, offering up their own ideas. But in that instance, I realized, okay, I have to approach everyone differently. So if someone agrees with me, I can't just kind of second that and go on. I may need to also question that person. And at the same time, may need to question the person who I disagree with or who's saying something I disagree with, as long as it's not something ridiculous. I may need to question them differently just to get them to think more critically about what it is they're saying, regardless of how I feel about it, and regardless of how well or how poorly it aligns with what I believe to be the actual facts of a historical event. Now, I think there are certain protocols that you should always take when you're approaching a professor. Do not assume that you are on the first name basis with your professor. If you are in a classroom with a woman or someone who is a femme, please do not be overly familiar. Address them as doctor, whatever, or professor, whatever. That, I think, goes a long way in making us open to hearing what you have to say. But I think it is always good for you to assume that the professor might actually want to hear what you have to say. You come to their office hours, or you come to them after class, and you raise your question, raise your objection. You might find that we're human. We may have had a bad day. We may not be thinking it all the way through. You presented something that we didn't take into account beforehand, and we responded in a flippant way that, given a second chance, we might think more thoughtfully about. You might actually help improve the classroom dynamic by raising questions, by coming and objecting to something that we might have said, again, in a respectful way. Don't just try and take over the class, or don't come and try and yell at us in our office hours. Those things generally don't work that well. But I think short of something out of bounds like that, it really does help us to hear how we are interacting, how we are running a classroom in real time, as opposed to waiting at the end of the semester and we get your evaluation. Oh, Dr. Makalani, first day of class, said this and I disagreed, and then he just shut me down and I didn't say anything else. You're not gaining as much as you can out of the classroom. Now, if you do that and then the professor is just hostile and goes off and starts throwing stuff, you may want to take another class. But I tend to think that the most professors you're going to find here are going to take into account what you're saying, and you might have a really productive dialogue.
Great. Professor Brock.
I just want to second what you said. I think that we are human. Some of us do have bad days. Some of us also just have randomly inarticulate days where we're just sort of things just don't come out right. And it seems to me, if you approach us I'm sure there are some professors who, if you criticize the way they're doing things, will just get into a defensive crouch and never come out. But I have always felt like when people criticize the way I'm doing things, at least within reason, if they're well, why did you shoot that student? Then, of course, I realize that there's nothing good to say about this situation at all, and I should just go turn myself into the police. But this doesn't happen. But if a person were to come and say, why did you run your classroom this way? I would usually feel like there's a good thing about this, which is that this student actually felt comfortable enough to tell me this, right? If I had been the most horrible person in the entire world, then maybe they wouldn't have. So I always really try to take it, I tried never to get into a defensive crouch, but to think, here is a student who has done a courageous thing, coming up to their professor. It shouldn't be that courageous, because really we are just human, but that's hard to realize, I think, when you've just arrived in college. And you should, we like to hear what you have to say. We really actually do. And we would like to hear sort of your questions about the material, but also your questions about why we're doing what we're doing. Because we don't get things right all the time, and we need to know that. And just also think about it from the point of view of your peers in class. If there's something that we're doing wrong, you may not be the only person who feels that way. And if it gets nipped in the bud now, then everybody else will have a much better time for the entire rest of the semester. So you could be saving a lot of people a lot of hurt.
Can I just say one quick
Yeah,
thing?
please,
Sorry.
go ahead.
So at the Ethnophagorans too, we definitely have had conversations with students who come and they'll ask us, why we brought that speaker, or why we did this, why we hosted a certain kind of event like that, and that definitely happens. First, just to echo my colleagues, I think, we certainly have Ethnophagorans too, but I think I can't think of a colleague of ours who would not be open to having that kind of conversation with a student who came in good faith, with those kinds of questions. The one thing I will say is that in my experience, when we're having those conversations, in the same way that like when students come to us and they're asking us to like question why we did a certain thing, right? They're asking us for a certain kind of openness and hearing their perspective. The conversations are most productive when the student who comes to us also has an openness about that, And so what's hard is when the student comes and they themselves are not open to engaging in a real back and forth about what occurred or whatever the incident is. And so I would just sort of urge you that, I think always in going to speak to faculty, about these kinds of questions that you have, and which I hope that you do, but that you do that with an acknowledgement of that, just as you're asking them to be open to the conversation, that you yourself should also come into that conversation being open to hearing the range of perspectives that might be on the table.
So that actually leads into another question. A lot of what you've talked about is kind of the normal intellectual discourse, right? That comes up in class. But we're increasingly faced with individuals who want to be offensive, right? Or want to be hateful. And what is your guidance of how to address this? Is this a moment to teach, to fight back? Where along that continuum does a response and academic freedom fall? I know particularly democracy, is in this area.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, this is a hard moment for academic freedom. It's a hard moment, for polarization, like, all the different things that we might think about. And I think the point that my colleagues have made, which is that, good faith really matters, I think, in these conversations. So the same question asked in bad faith and asked in good faith is very, very different, right? And in terms of how we might engage with it as an institute, let's say, or how, a class as a community might want to engage with it. And so the way that, I think it is absolutely true that there are people out there that are trying to throw bombs for the sake of throwing bombs, right? They're trying to sort of generate the kind of controversy, and that's absolutely not productive for the kinds of things that we're talking about. And so a lot of the things that we think about, for example, at Agora is how we think about that in preventive ways, right? Like, how do we construct the norms in the community? How do we construct the kind of the classroom itself, or whatever the setting is that we're working on, to have people not operate, sort of in those ways. But then secondly, how do we think very carefully about who we're bringing into that space and how we're bringing them into those spaces? And so those are all, I think, really important kind of considerations. When I think there is a question or a comment that is made in bad faith, in my experience, and I'd be curious what my colleagues have to say, like, I think it's important to call that out, and to name it. And so then if you name it, then the community can address it together, whereas if it's not named, then it becomes a real challenge in being able to sort of work around it in a way. And so, a lot of campuses across the United States, as you guys, I don't know if you guys follow it or not, have had challenges with, speakers being disinvited or this or that. And I think some of those speakers are probably operating in bad faith, and so that doesn't feel like someone that we want to bring into our community. But then if there is an unexpected incident where that happens, then we have to be able to address it proactively, I think, together.
Yeah, so I think when you're dealing with somebody who's operating in bad faith, and I'm here thinking not of speakers, but and in my experience, I mean, I don't know a lot of Hopkins students who have struck me as operating in bad faith, but there may be one. I mean, you look around you, there's a whole lot of people. Odds are maybe there's at least one person. The first thing to think is, this is a very sad way to lead your life, right? Just like going around trying to annoy people for no good reason. I mean, if you look back at the end of your life, one person looks back and thinks, oh, I built some bridges that really served other people well. And one person thinks, I dug ditches, but I dug them in a great way. And a third person thinks, I made great advances in epidemiology. And a fourth person thinks, I try to offend people just for the laugh, just as a joke, right? That's what I spent my whole life doing. That's sad. But the second thing is, if this is a person who's in the community, not somebody we're bringing in as a speaker, but somebody who's already here, then it would be a great service if you or someone could find some way of engaging that person. Because probably they're not bad faith all the way down. I mean, most people aren't. Probably maybe hidden, under an enormous amount of bad faith. There's a tiny little kernel somewhere. And usually you don't find that kernel by approaching the person in the way that they expect, right? Usually, there's a way people think that these interactions are going to go when they're trolling you. They expect a certain response, and they're prepared for that. But if you can find a way of sort of sneaking around and asking them a question that they haven't anticipated, that makes them stop and go like, well, wait, whoa, that wasn't what I expected her to be like, oh God, how could you say such a, but she's asking a different question. That's when I think you stand the greatest chance of being able to find the kernel of them. That is a great kindness to them, but you're not doing it because it's like, well, we should be nice to everybody, right? I mean, we should, but you're doing that in part, first, because it's a great kindness to everybody else in the community if you find a way of reaching that person such that that person does not go around trying to just make other people miserable all the time, right? Who wants to do that? And if you can reach that tiny kernel of humanity somehow, that's a great thing. But again, to do that, I think you have to not fall into whatever pattern they're expecting from you. You have to recognize that if they say, outrageous thing X, they're expecting you to go, oh my God, that was an outrageous thing that you just said. And then they get to be like, ha, edgy again, I see. But that's not, that doesn't do anybody any good. That's a pointless little dance that everybody is engaging in that doesn't get us anywhere. But trying to do something unexpected, right? Trying to come at them from a direction they don't necessarily anticipate, that's the way in which you reach the person who, in almost all cases, is somewhere lurking behind this great mass of general odiousness. Anyways.
Let me paraphrase a question about in our digital age, right? So can academic freedom coexist, right, with online harassment, right, and online platforms that allow for bomb throwers to not only exist but be promulgated? And on the flip side, we have a cancel culture, right, of which is of concern for shutting down conversations or deleting posts. How do you see academic freedom intersecting with and existing in this milieu?
Sure, I can start. Yes. So I think a couple things. I think that the problem with a lot of the way that our digital spaces are constructed is that they prioritize attention, and so to me it's a structure of the attention economy that really drives a lot of the sort of nasty behavior that we see online, because you're incentivized to try to put out posts that get you as many likes as you can, or that go viral in ways. And what do we know about the kind of posts that do that? They're the ones that are the most incendiary, right? They're the ones that drive attention. And so I think in thinking about the relationship of digital spaces and these challenges of academic freedom that we're talking about, the first thing to think about to me is this question of why are people seeking the attention, and what is it that they really want? A lot of my own research is on community organizing and social movements, and I do a lot of work with grassroots organizers all over the world. And one of the things I always talk to them about is this idea that if you look at the most successful sort of social movements throughout the world, throughout history, the first thing to know is that attention and power are not the same thing, right? Getting attention is not the same thing as actually being able to advance the cause that you want to advance. And so I think very often in a lot of these digital spaces, there's a kind of seeking of attention that you have to sort of question in the beginning. You know, one of the things that we do a lot of work on is kind of this idea of, you know, part of what happened with the emergence of the internet is that it's an unfettered digital space, right? But what we know about nurturing things like academic freedom or any other really kind of rights and responsibilities that have to do with democracy is that those spaces have to be intentionally designed, right? And nothing about the internet was actually intentionally designed. And so the challenge in a way is not, I think, to get rid of the technology, right? Because it has lots of wonderful benefits that we want to hold on to, but to sort of think about how do we design that, right? And then create a sort of incentive system around it that sort of promotes the kind of behaviors that we want. But that being said, in the short term, we're stuck with what we have, right? And so how does academic freedom, I think, coexist with that? I mean, I think the answer is that it does, and it has to, right? Because like we can't give up for all the reasons that we've been talking about this morning, we can't give up our commitment to these kind of freedoms. And so that's where the onus, I think, you know, I know I'm coming back to this idea, but it is incumbent upon you all, just as it is incumbent upon us as faculty to sort of nurture those spaces, to promote that kind of work. But you guys play a big role in how those spaces operate, you know? And so if there is a digital forum in which you feel like the principles of academic freedom are not being upheld, you know, doing the things that Professor Bach is talking about, you know, approaching the person you feel like is not acting in good faith, about calling out the behavior that is being unproductive, like all of those kinds of things are, you know, are a role that you all can play, just as, you know, we as faculty can play a different but similar role in the classrooms that we construct.
And so we're probably all the same generation on the stage, and so online harassment, and this is where my age comes in. I don't know that I have a way to respond or advise someone how to respond to online harassment, because my go-to would be, well, if they're not showing up at your doorstep, then you're okay. But that's from a generation that didn't grow up with this. And so I think this is one of those questions that your generation is probably best equipped to think about. How does one respond to online harassment, or how does one respond to or defend or pursue something like academic freedom or intellectual inquiry in an environment where one can face a great deal of harassment, where it can have real consequences and negative mental health consequences. And so I'm not saying that I don't understand it unless someone's at my doorstep to be flippant. It's just a much different environment that you all have grown up with. And I have a daughter who's 14 and one who's 30, and they have an engagement with social media that I don't know how that operates, where online harassment can be effective. And that's probably just my blind side on that. But one of the things I think that, to the extent that I've engaged in like Twitter and Facebook at a certain point, one of the things that became clear to me and why I got off of social media, and this is in line with what Dr. Hanna said, I became convinced that a great deal of what happens on social media isn't about actually being thoughtful and thinking through ideas and an engagement of ideas. I began to see a lot of clickbait, a lot of pursuing certain kind of cultural cachet from having a series of pithy tweets, making declarations that were designed to make the individual look really intelligent or look politically more advanced. But then if you pull at the threads, quite literally, and you ask a question, it might begin to all fall apart, or they become hostile in response. And there's a way that I've seen social media followers kind of gang up on particular people online, and these are my friends that just like, okay, I don't need this. So, but how does one then operate in that realm when that is your mode of communication, that is it's intricate to your social network? I don't know that I necessarily have the answer for that question or how one approaches it, but I think one of the criteria should always be, is the engagement, is what someone is putting out there, or is what I'm putting out there, is it something that invites exchange? Is it an actual inquiry, not just a declaration? And even if it is a declaration, am I open to being challenged and being pushed and going back and forth, not in a way to be hostile and just affirm my rightness, the truth of what I've said, but rather to try and better understand what it is one is concerned with. I think that becomes a criteria that expands, that spans both publishing in academic journals or academic books, publishing in, say, the New York Times or the Washington Post, an online forum, or social media. And if you find yourself engaging with people who are just making truth claims and they aren't open to any kind of engagement, or you maybe ask a question that's critical and you just get shut down, is that really worth engaging? And that, I think, is one of the things that, to the extent that growing up in the age of debate forums and newsletters and magazines, a plethora of magazines that have been replaced by social media forums, that I think it translates to your generation as well.
Yeah, Professor Bach, last word.
Yeah, so we were talking about this a little bit before, and I mentioned that I have actually on one occasion gotten an actual death threat as a result of something I posted online.
Okay.
It was opposing torture, amazing to say. So I have a thick skin. I tend to just sort of file things away into there's one pile which has only one member so far, which is call the FBI. And then there's another file which is figure out whether this person has anything that really should make me rethink my views, and if not, just discard. And then, of course, there's the third file, from people I know and have some sort of actual relationship with, which is a different thing altogether. But, I think, to me, it's always worth so I find it worth trying to understand everybody. When I find that I can't understand somebody, it really bugs me. So I think it's really worth trying to understand, where do these people come from? The people who will decide that when somebody says something that might or might not actually be genuinely offensive, something like, I'm not sure we should be torturing people right now, right? They start sending you death threats. That's just the most bizarre thing. And I assume that at least some part of the reason is they think they're right. They think they're on the side of righteousness, whatever that might be. And they think that then they must do something on the side of righteousness, like something to oppose the unrighteousness that they think is on the other side. And they're so fixated on the idea that they themselves are righteous and these other people are unrighteous that they don't stop and think, what am I doing? Am I being, is the thing that I'm doing now one of those righteous things or one of those unrighteous things? So if you ask yourself that, suppose somebody says, whatever it is that you disagree with most, imagine somebody says that, and now imagine that you, in response, send them a death threat, right? Well, obviously, however horrible what they said is, you have just done another horrible thing if you sent them a death threat. Right? So you always have to, I think, be open to the question well, and what am I doing? And I tend to think that the people who respond in this way, who swarm other people on social media and, do nothing that actually contributes to any possible debate or search for truth, but just say something like, oh, you suck, right? They must not be stopping to think right, it's not enough to figure out, do I personally think that this person's views are awful? You have to also ask, is what I'm doing in response perhaps also awful? And I tend to think that if more people thought that way, ask themselves that question and realize that, there can be several awful people in this picture, then you wouldn't have so much online harassment and people would just, hang out on the nice parts of Twitter, like epidemiology Twitter I've always found is very nice and civil. Medievalist Twitter I also recommend. And not so much Twitter anymore though, it's gone all to hell in a handbasket. But, I think, you can find good places where people are actually interested in having arguments and then, block and function.
All right, well, that brings us to the end of the hour. I hope this shows academic freedom. academic freedom isn't, a box that sits on the shelf, right? It's a set of responsibilities, and we want you to use it on a daily basis, every day that you're here at Hopkins and afterwards. So please, again, thank the speakers, help me thank the speakers, and have a wonderful day. Thank you.